Welcome to the IDP Plus, formerly IDP Guys, Free Agent Palooza. I'm your host today, Ricky Rodrigue. You can find me at RickyRod66. And we're going to have a lot of fun talking about a lot of free agency. We had a great show on Monday. If you missed it, please go and rewatch that. It was a terrific show. There was so much to talk about. We didn't hit everything on Monday, so we're going to hit some things we didn't talk from the first day, and we're going to hit on some things that have happened over the last couple of days as well. And to help me with that, I've got three outstanding, esteemed colleagues, and we'll let them quickly introduce themselves, and then we'll get right into it. So today we have Johnny freaking Fantasy with us. So Johnny, introduce yourself to the group.
Wow, man, you said it. It was a great show on Monday, and I tell you what, when I got a whiff of that, I said, man, I got to get me a piece of it. So thank you for having me on. I'm excited. A lot of stuff has been going on, too much to even keep track of it all. So thank you for providing the platform for me to be a part of, and I'm excited to be on with my guy. Steve's my co-host on IDP Plus Trends. So good to be back with him. And Sean, I did some mock drafts with. So nice to see some familiar faces. Let's go.
All right. Thank you, Johnny. Steve.
I'm Steve, Average Joe's Fantasy Football. I'm excited. Johnny and I have been doing some great stuff in the trends department and for our podcast. And yeah, it's been a good, exciting 2 days. And again, a lot more to come. There's still a lot of great free agency players out there. So I'm excited to see what's going to happen.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. And then Sean.
Yeah, Sean Teague at Sean8386 on the X. Happy to be back. Just want to throw this out there to Carolina. I am still unsigned, and I have just as good a name as anybody else on that team. If they got some cash, I'm willing to sign right now.
Any particular position you're aiming for, Sean? Or you not particular?
It's not going to matter. I'm not going to last long, but I'm willing to. Yeah, I'm willing to run out there.
All righty. So, gentlemen, let's start off with the same question that we started off on Monday, but it's a great question. What is the biggest surprise of the last couple of days now related to free agency and our trades that have happened that have really, surprised you? And we'll start with Johnny.
I'll tell you what, man, you can see this terrible towel behind me. I'm a Steeler fan, this way, that way, whatever way it is. So with me, man, Pittsburgh, I mean, that's my biggest, the moves that the Steelers have made. Usually they don't splash and do that. I mean, a lot of people thought that Mason Rudolph might get another chance next year. Personally, I'm happy that they're moving on from him. He's going to Tennessee, but you don't really see the Steelers make these splash signings that they have. Russell Wilson, Patrick Queen. All my life, I really haven't remembered a big free agency signing like that. So I'm really excited for the Steelers. Really excited for Patrick Queen as a landing spot. On one hand, the Pittsburgh Steelers struggle to have consistency when we talk about IDP at the linebacker, but I'm excited to have Patrick Queen there. Doesn't have much competition there, so I'm really excited to see what the team provides on offense, and they really help themselves on defense. That was great already. So go Steelers.
Thank you, Johnny. All right, Steve, let's go to you. Biggest surprise of the last couple of days.
I would say the biggest surprise is the fact that the Minnesota Vikings currently are relying on Sam Darnold as their quarterback. I know everyone's expecting him to be the backup, but he's a very highly paid backup at $10 million. And I would not be surprised if he is their stopgap currently, if they do draft a quarterback this upcoming April. But that is probably my biggest surprise, that you're letting an outstanding receiving core like Addison and Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson, and you got Sam Darnold. So that's probably my biggest surprise so far.
Okay. And we're going to come back and talk about both Queen and Darnold a little bit later. Sean, your biggest surprise?
I've got two. One of them is Devin White is still unsigned with all the linebackers flying around from team to team. He is, and I've heard nothing as far as him going anywhere to getting tryouts or, in talks with any team. So that's kind of baffling. And then the other happened just a little while ago today. Calvin Ridley made a lot of money from the Titans, who were not willing to give the same money to A.J. Brown just a couple years ago. So that kind of blows my mind that they were willing to give Ridley the money and not A.J. Brown. I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah. And Calvin Ridley is going on 30 years old to start the next year. And usually you start seeing that fall off in receivers at that 30, 31 range. And they didn't just give him a lot of money, they gave it over 4 years. So that's a great point. Now, there's some conspiracy theory going on. And so that's a great lead into something I wanted to mention here. Very suspicious. The Jaguars were minus 300 to sign him. The Patriots were plus 200, and the Titans were plus 1,800 to sign him. And of course, he signed with the Titans. So given Ridley's past history, there might want to be an investigation to how much money was placed on the Titans on that line and see if Ridley or any family members were involved in that. I digress. Just kidding if Calvin Ridley's family is watching in any way, shape, or form here. All righty. So so let's go ahead and start with the wide receivers today. And we talked about Ridley. So you got now in Tennessee, you have Calvin Ridley, probably a very unhappy DeAndre Hopkins and Treylon Burks. Let's start with Johnny here. 1, 2, 3, rank them in terms of from a fantasy points. When we look at the end of the 2024 season, who's going to have the most fantasy points, second and last of those three?
So I'm going to take this with the big grain of salt is the receptions. I think because of the rapport that Hopkins and Levis have right now, the kind of caliber receiver DeAndre Hopkins has been over his career, I think the volume, the targets, the attention will be on DeAndre Hopkins. I think we'll see something similar to Calvin Ridley in Jacksonville this past year. I don't see him coming out and getting 8 or 9, 10 targets, double-digit targets. I just don't see that happening. I do think it's a great signing from Tennessee, to help Will Levis out, give him options. But at the same time, yeah, I really like Treylon Burks as a dart throw for the up-and-coming developing prospect. So I like these guys. I think they got Will Levis good help here on offense, a team that needed some offensive help. But I'm going to go with Hopkins will remain the number one and PPR target, especially in PPR. You're probably going to have Hopkins first. Calvin Ridley's going to do his thing. He's going to have some big plays. Unfortunately, I don't think you can really count on that. It's going to be hit or miss week to week. So he's my number 2. And Treylon Burks, just by default, him going down the depth chart. If you're holding on to him in Dynasty, if you were hoping for that breakout, unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's going to happen at least this year. Maybe he gets traded, but nice number 3 to have, I think.
Okay. So those that invested in Burks from a dynasty perspective way back when as a rookie, you're just seeing those shares just plummet, it sounds like, Johnny. So let me go to Steve here, and I'm asking one important question related to this. When we get to week 12 of the season, who's the starting quarterback for Tennessee? Is it Will Levis, or is it going to be Mason Rudolph, who they just signed today?
I still think it's going to be Will Levis. I am not a Will Levis fan. I had a few shares of him in some of my dynasties, and when he had those few good games last season, I sold him as fast as I could for better than what I had, drafted him. So I don't think Will Levis will be around in the next 2 to 3 years. I think he's more of a filler because they needed a quarterback, and let's be honest, that draft class was not great. So for me, it's still Will Levis. I do like the signing of actually Mason Rudolph. I think that's actually a good signing for him and for the Tennessee Titans, but I don't think he's going to take that starting job at all. Will Levis should still be the quarterback. I do see him improving, but I don't think he's really the guy for them.
Yeah, and the reason I asked the question is you're right, because Johnny had a big assumption about Levis and Hopkins and their connection and so forth. If Levis isn't the quarterback, he had 4 touchdowns in that first game last year and then not much after that. So I personally think Rudolph is going to be the starting quarterback for the Titans at some point in the year. Maybe it's week 10 or 11. I think I have big concerns about Levis. So, okay. So Sean, going to you with some of that context, what's your order? And how mad is DeAndre Hopkins going to be when he's making 10 million and Ridley's making way more than that?
If they can't block, it's, nobody's going to lead this team outside of Tony Pollard. That's where it could go if they don't improve this line, because it was terrible last year. That was a big part of their problem. So a lot more check downs, stuff like that. So whoever is running the short, intermediate routes, probably Hopkins, because he's more of your possession guy. He's got the big hands. I still think he's the top guy. They're going to feed him. They pretty much have to. Like I say,
So
if it's all to the line for me. Like I'm actually kind of scared of this offense for fantasy, unless they can really make some improvements up front and block and give him time. I might actually kind of stay away from these guys or hope everybody overdrafts them. That's what I'm really hoping.
Don't forget about Chigo, though. He's actually one of my dark horse tight ends this upcoming season.
Again, that goes back to those, short, medium routes there, where he can get some quick releases there. So that's not a bad play. The preseason, I guess, is going to be really telling, if they can hold up some block, if they actually go out there and try instead of waiting until, the first couple of games of the season. But it's, receiver wise, it's still Hopkins for me, then Ridley. I like Chig as a dark horse. That's a good call. And then, man, the running backs, what do you do there?
Yep. But it sounds like
there's a lot of questions.
So to wrap up the Titans here real quick, it sounds like we're seeing Hopkins as a low end 2, high end 3, and Ridley as a 3, and Burks as a 4 or a 5 from the sounds of things. That's what I'm hearing from you gentlemen.
Burks is off my radar. I can't remember the last time the Titans supported 2 wide receivers, let alone 3. You'd have to go back to probably Corey Davis and AJ Brown several years ago. And even then it was tight. It wasn't like one of them was far ahead of the other. So it's not been a traditionally strong offense to support more than one receiver.
Okay, so let's shift gears. While it's free agent Palooza, it's also about trades and player movement overall. Deontay Johnson goes from Johnny's beloved Pittsburgh Steelers to the Carolina Panthers. From a redraft perspective, Johnny, is this a good thing for Deontay or a bad thing for Deontay? Is he dropping in your rankings or moving up or stable?
No, he's definitely coming up, albeit a little bit. I wouldn't say he's a big jump in the rankings. One thing that he is able to get away from is Pittsburgh. We're just so run heavy over here. And for him, I think he's going to be on a team that's just bad, and knowing how bad Carolina is going to be, bad teams have to throw the football because they're down in games. So number one, I think there's just going to be more targets. You had Pickens here who kind of took the luster away from each other, really. They really couldn't excel. Number one, who was the number one? Nobody really could step up. Granted, there was quarterback issues. It was just a mess. So I think Deontay leaving for his sake is good. I expect the targets, the receptions to go up. One thing about Deontay Johnson, as much as we hated him, I'll say, in Pittsburgh because he was known for his drops. I think there was a stat that said over the last 5 years, here was the wide receivers who had the most drops. He was number 2. Johnson was number 2. Number 1 was actually Tyreek Hill. So that was a little interesting. You can drop balls, but if you make the big plays, we don't remember that. We don't remember the drops. Now, I don't think that he's going to be a surefire, Mike Evans go up and get it receiver. And that's really what I'm thinking true number 1 is. I don't think he is that. But what Deontay Johnson can do really well is get open. He's great at getting open. He's going to do that for Bryce Young. That was a good signing. Doesn't equal what they've done, the tumultuous moves they have made. But at the same time, it's a nice starting ground. I expect Jonathan Mingo to kind of step up for Carolina too. And they still have Thielen there as well. So it's not like he's going somewhere where he's the only guy and he's going to get peppered with all these targets. I do think the targets come up, the yards probably by default, just because of the offensive situation. I do think it's a good move overall for Deontay Johnson when we talk about redraft. But at the same time, I'm not here penciling in Deontay Johnson in my top 25. Probably doesn't scratch the surface with top 30 either. So a modest jump, but yes, he has enabled himself to get better from especially a redraft point of view.
So, Steve, You think Bryce Young, particularly with now they've got this new beef, these two guards to kind of, because particularly like since he's short, same thing the Saints did with Drew Brees, put people like Carl Nicks and Jari Evans in front of him to keep that pressure from the inside so he can get it off. You think those kind of changes will allow Bryce Young to be successful and get the ball to the Deontay Johnsons? And if so, where do you see Deontay Johnson as a top 36, top 24? And the same with Mingo while we're at it.
Yeah, I actually like this move for Bryce, right? You had your best receiver was Thielen, and actually a lot of people forget how great Thielen was in redraft last season. He actually was one of the better receivers, and then they kind of faltered toward the end of the season, but he started off hot. Like, he was on fire, and now you're adding a receiver who can actually get open. The one complaint, and if you look at any of these receivers, Mingo had no separation against the defensive backs. Thielen couldn't get separation. So Bryce had no one to throw to because they weren't open. Now you get the offensive coordinator for the Bucs. He's going to be able to actually scheme this offense properly. They are going to run first. I think that's going to be their first, you got Sanders and Hubbard. I like Deontay as a low-end wide receiver too. I have him ranked a little bit higher because I think he's going to be force-fed some targets. I do like this move for Bryce Young. I actually I hate to say it, but I loved him not being successful last season as a fantasy perspective because I was able to get him in several dynasties at a really cheap cost. A lot of people drafted him as the 101, maybe the 102, depending on how you felt about CJ. And so if I can get a quarterback like that, I got him in a couple drafts for just a second round pick. So, and it's only going to get better for him because they've got an offensive line. Hopefully they perform well. It does take time to gel, but I think this point's really high, heavily, and in favor for both Bryce and Deontay. Bryce is still not a redraft quarterback, but he's still a strong superflex dynasty player right now.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. So, Sean, we're going to shift back to the Falcons. And on Monday night's show, we talked about Kirk Cousins and how we were seeing the ADPs of a lot of his weapons just significantly skyrocket. Now there's a little bit of maybe water on the fire with the addition of Darnell Mooney as well. So from a fantasy perspective, a redraft perspective, do you see Mooney in the top 48, top 36, top 60 from a wide receiver perspective? And does this further doubt London from what we talked on Monday night? Or are you like, London's probably still in that low end 3 range, mid 3 range? Thoughts, Sean?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to hurt London too much because I do think this team's actually going to be more run heavy than we're all prepared for. So I don't know about Mooney. I'm not putting him real high. I think a low end 4, like very low end, high 5, somewhere around there. I'm not sold on Mooney. I don't know why. There's just nothing that. Yeah, he was exciting a few years ago. I guess it's just the Bears blues hanging out with them for too long have kind of soured on him. But I still think the big target here is Pitts, or I'm hoping it is. And in London, yeah, he's still the top guy. He's still got that first round pedigree there. I'm not seeing anything really hurt anybody's value there.
All right. Well, so Kirk Cousins was second in deep ball percentage accuracy. And of course, he's going to be the new quarterback there. And Mooney does a lot of deep routes. And he was very successful in his rookie year when he had over 1,000 yards. So, Johnny, you heard Sean, you heard those couple of stats I just threw in there. Do you still agree with Sean? It's like, Ricky, those are nice stats, but he's still a low end 4.
I think he's got work to do. I do have a bad taste in my mouth too, like Sean. Darnell Mooney. I mean, what was the competition in Chicago for him not to step up, right? So he was the number 2 there too. So on one hand, it's he needs to do something different himself. Maybe I understand in Chicago, Fields was under a lot of pressure. Wasn't really a great situation there. Maybe Fields doesn't look his way that much, and maybe things change with Kirk Cousins, but. To me, he's on a prove it deal in my book. I mean, I'm not going to go out and draft him. I would expect him to be better than he was last year. I don't think I'd have him inside my top 50. I mean, we have guys outside the top 50 like Marvin Mims, a couple other rookies too. And now I'm taking those, over Darnell Mooney. He's probably going to be somebody who might be, unless you're in a deeper league, probably not going to be drafted. So in that case, if he is not drafted, you just pay attention to him. You just keep him on your watch list. At that point, if there is chemistry, I don't think he's going to be a high volume guy, but if that's not the case, then I'll change my trajectory. But I'm with Sean. I'm not really too interested. I do think the potential's there, the recipe's there. Let's see if they can put the pieces together, and I'll surely be watching him because he, like you said, he does have 1,000-yard season under his belt, and he is still young, and he gets a better quarterback, as far as proven, throwing the ball. So I think it could go both ways. I'm not sold on him, and I wouldn't rush to jump him up too much in the rankings, but I do think it's a better recipe for him.
Thank you, Johnny. Now, we're going to jump back and forth between the offensive and defense side of the ball. So we're going to switch gears to the defensive side. And on Monday night, we didn't have a chance to talk about defensive tackles. So I do want to talk about a few, particularly for people that play 5-position IDP leagues. And oh my gosh, 2 gentlemen got monster contracts, and some people consider them monsters on the football field. Chris Jones and Christian Wilkins. So Steve, do you think with Chris Jones getting all that money, one of the things that I saw a lot, because I own him in a couple of dynasty leagues, was when he hustled and played hard, it was fantastic. But there's other times it's like, man, get the lead out your butt. You're playing, they're still paying you good money. Is he going to do you think he's just going to say, okay, I got a nice fat contract with guaranteed money, or is that going to really motivate him to show what he's capable of? What do you think, Steve?
Well, I don't think he's going to do the Albert Hainsworth. If you guys all remember that one. I do think he'll still shine and play well. I agree. I had Chris Jones in a few leagues. I still have him in a few of my dynasty leagues. And there are moments where he absolutely just shines and he looks amazing. You're like, man, I'm glad I have him on my defensive line. And there are a lot of times where he doesn't do anything, right? And part of it is that if you think about the rest of that defensive line, there really isn't anybody that scares you on Kansas City when it comes to the pass rush, where we talked about, Wilkins going to the Raiders, you got Crosby to deal with. So there's a difference there, right? Chris Jones is the guy in Kansas City. So he does get a lot more focus on him. So he can disappear in games. I don't think this paycheck affects him at all. He deserved it. I think they are truly hungry and wanting this 3-peat. You can tell, this is big for them. But I don't think there's anything. He's still one of the best defensive linemen we're going to have in IDP for sure.
So you see him as a top 3 DT, it sounds like, for this coming year.
Yeah, he's too versatile. He just expect a game or two where he doesn't show up, but overall he's going to help you win.
Okay, thank you. Sean, Christian Wilkins. Steve just mentioned it, paired with Max Crosby. Tyree Wilson was starting to come on at the end of the year. Malcolm Kuntz was starting to come on the end of the year. What's the ceiling for Wilkins this year? Are all these guys going to cancel him out, or are he still going to put up the big stats as he goes over to the Raiders? And is he still a top 3 defensive tackle? All of those questions. Handle them all.
I got him. As a Dolphins fan, I am upset. First of all, let's get that one out of the way.
That's why I saved the question for you.
I appreciate that. I think he'll be just fine. I think he's still one of the top 5 guys there. He's a tackle machine, and then he set career highs in sacks. I want to say somewhere around 9.5, something like that. So fantastic season for him. He's been stuffing the run since he's coming to the league. So his tackles are going to keep him as a weekly starter, probably in most defensive tackle leagues. I don't see Kuntz or Wilson being too big of a problem. I think if anything, he probably eats into Crosby's tackles, but I think Crosby will be able to get more sacks because of his presence. So I think they'll actually boost each other, and I could see that for Wilson and Kuntz on the rotation there. They could also get some better opportunities while he's plugging up the middle. So I think it benefits all of them. So wherever you have them ranked, just boost them all up a little bit. And we could see Crosby finally in major consideration for Defensive Player of the Year and get up, 18 sacks or something like that. I mean, we've seen his motor. We've seen, how close he gets, the pressures, the hits. And if he doesn't have to worry about all the tackles and can get clear, and get to the quarterback, we could see career stuff from him. So I'm really excited for this, actually.
Yeah, you can absolutely see Wilkins actually helping Crosby get a couple of extra cheapy sacks by pushing the pocket. Quarterback just scrambles out a little bit, and boom, there's Crosby for the sack. So I hear you on that. Johnny, we're going to switch to the Houston Texans now. We're going to go a little bit defensive tackle and edge here a little bit. So the Texans, they lost Greenard, as we talked about on Monday. They come back with Danielle Hunter, the outstanding stud from LSU. I have to get an LSU plug in, as all everybody that watches me know that. So there's your first LSU plug for the night there. Then they add Danico Autry as well on top of that. So it's redraft time, and Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter are staring you on the draft board, Johnny. Which one you picking first, Anderson or Hunter?
Hunter. And to me, it's not close. I mean, Will Anderson, you can make the argument maybe in Dynasty, maybe. I mean, on one hand, he's getting older. Hunter is almost 30, but I feel like he's been playing for so long. He's still 29. He's not even 30 yet. So, I mean, this is a great move for Houston. They're in win now mode. I think this is great. You weren't at a problem with Grenard, but at the same time, this is certainly an upgrade. To me, I am excited to see kind of how the stats translate, because where he was in Minnesota, he was not only getting the sacks like crazy, he was getting tackles too. I play in a two linebacker league, and actually somebody had the audacity to roster him, and he ended up being a fine play for the whole year, competing with, LB2s, LB3s. He was up there. So Danielle Hunter, I can't sit here and guarantee that the tackles will go up, tackles will go down. I'd like to say just the change of scenery and the attention that they also have there in Houston. I think the tackles will probably, I don't think you can, say he's going to have the same amount. Maybe they go down, but certainly there's room for the sacks to be there as well. Whatever the situation is as for a team, for Houston, I love the signing. Danielle Hunter, it's going to be tough because, like Wilkins had such a great year the past 2 years. How do you match that on one hand, especially learning a new scheme, new team? So I like it a lot. I wouldn't knock him down really anywhere. I'm kind of calling him as it is. This is who he is, Danielle Hunter. The stats you saw last year, expect him to see him this year, and he's in the prime of his career. So I love it. I love it for Houston.
Right. So I love giving our audience perspective in terms of where we see these folks potentially on a draft board and so forth. And of course, IDP scoring systems, you always have to know your scoring system. That's true for offense as well. But I like to give people a flavor. So Steve, I'm going to ask you, where do you see Hunter, top 6, top 12, top 18 as an edge player? And similarly with Will Anderson, where do you see him?
Hunter would probably squeak into that top 12. If he should be able to keep that consistency there when it comes to the way defensive line plays. Again, like you mentioned, scoring does play a factor, right? Like, fumble forces, sacks, different things like that could play a little bit in there. But I would say top 12 for sure. I could see him maybe even squeaking into the top 8. I'm trying to think of, defensive linemen. You've got, some obviously great players, especially those who have that dual tag linebacker DL. So that kind of plays a factor there. Will Anderson, I would say he's definitely top 20. He is stronger on the dynasty side, especially if you're in a team that has 2 defensive linemen, and then obviously linebackers and defensive backs where you've got a little bit of a bigger roster to fill. His dynasty value is a lot stronger, especially being the age that he is. And he's only going to get better. I think he can learn a lot from Hunter coming onto this team, and he's still learning a lot from D'Amico Ryans. Like D'Amico is an amazing, defensive player for the Texans, great head coach, great defensive coordinator. So I think we'll surpass Hunter in the next couple of years, but Hunter will still be the guy for sure right now.
Okay, great. Sean, is Danico Autry, particularly if he gets defensive tackle eligibility, is he an outstanding sleeper opportunity, even though he's turning 30, but go on.
Yeah, absolutely. He's somebody I get all the time in defensive tackle leagues. In fact, it's one reason I wait for defensive tackle. If I don't get, some of the top 5 guys, I'll just, continue to hammer away at linebacker or edge, whatever. And then I'll come back and get Autry because he's sneaky good every year. He didn't really blossom until late in his career. He was good with Indy and Tennessee, and I see him doing the same thing. I mean, because you have Daniil Hunter, Will Anderson out there on and he's going to rotate around, so he moves inside and outside, and I'm excited to see him still playing because he's sneaky good. He'll give you some good 2-sack weeks. Some days he'll get you maybe a handful of tackles, but for the most part, I would start him more so in 2 defensive tackle leagues. But yeah, even in single, he's if you're going to stream, he's one of my favorite streamers. So yeah, I love having Nico Autry still around.
All right, so we're going to switch over now to the Commanders, and we're going to start with some of their defensive line and linebacker moves here a little bit. So on the edge, they have signed Dorrance Armstrong from the Cowboys, who had 15.5 sacks over the last couple of years. They signed Cleveland Farrell, former top 5 pick, but everybody knows he probably shouldn't have been. I could have been the GM and done a better job with the Raiders back then. And then Dante Fowler. So 2 former Cowboys follow Quinn over to the Commanders. Armstrong's the one I want to focus on, though, first. With him getting 15.5 sacks over the last couple of years, and that's with about 50% playing time, with a chance to potentially play 70 to 80% of the playing time. Does he jump into the top 24, Steve?
I don't know, right? Like I watched him obviously play a lot, being a Cowboy fan myself. And I get it. It's hard, right? You had Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence ahead of him. Plus, they said Sam Williams. That defensive line for the Cowboys was pretty deep, so it was tough for Dorrance to kind of get in there. I do like Armstrong. I think he's a better run defender more than so pass rush. If you're going to put him as a full timer, I think he'd be a really good job at that. I do think his value is there. I like him better than Dante Fowler. Fowler is more of a specialist than anything else. I don't think he's going to be a full-time player. I think he's going to be used sparingly. He's going to be used as rotation. So Armstrong definitely has the leg up on that. I don't think I put him anywhere as far as a redraft perspective. He might be, if you're in a little bit deeper roster and you've got to fill a couple defensive lineman spots, you could possibly put him in there. But I don't have him really anything higher than that. I think he's going to be a deeper stash play than anything else. But I don't hate it for the Washington Commanders. It's a comfort level. It's somebody that obviously, this coaching staff knows really well, and it's comfortable for him as well to transition into.
Okay. So, Sean, I'm coming back to you because we're going to talk about Bobby Wagner. And I think every start-sit show that we did this past year, we had 2 or 3 questions about, should I start Wagner or should I start somebody else? And I was always the guy saying, yeah, he's putting up good counting stats, but if you look at true performance, it hasn't been that strong. Okay, he was with Quinn when Quinn was at Seattle. He's now going to be with Quinn in Washington. He'll be in the middle of that defense for the Commanders. Is he going to be a top 15 linebacker this year? Does age finally catch up with him? Sean?
I think we've seen age catch up a little bit last year. However, he's still solid. And, if you're tackle heavy, I think he's still a top 15 guy. Now, he's getting further towards 15 than number 1, but I think he's still up there. We've seen this position produce in years past, and Cody Barton did great there, right? So, yeah, Bobby Wagner, he'll be fine. He knows the system. He knows the coach. They're just going to turn him loose.
Okay. Johnny, you agree with that?
I agree wholeheartedly. And one thing about Wagner, I'll always say this with Steve on the Trends podcast. Sometimes, the grass isn't always greener. What we saw was him, do so well in Seattle. He did go to LA and do well too. And I have really no concerns, about him, coming to Washington. I do think that spot's for him. They're not going to sign him to bench him. So he's definitely going to be out there doing his thing. Like Sean said, made a good point. We saw age kind of come into play last year. Bobby Wagner, this is just a guy you want on your team, whether it's him, Levante David. Age to me, doesn't matter. You know, they're just bangers. They play. That's what you need. You need somebody who's going to be available, somebody who's not going to worry about losing their spot. I don't think that's the case here in Washington. So I really like Wagner. Don't think I would probably like him more in Seattle, just, knowing what I'm getting. I would say if he was in Seattle, I'd say pencil him in as a top, 3 redraft. I could see him slipping a little bit in Washington, not because other people will step on him, just because it's a new team. I'm a little bit uncertainty. And there is age, if you're
even with Quinn,
if you're playing dynasty, you still have to factor the age, and redraft is not a factor. And bottom line, I think as long as Bobby Wagner is out there doing his thing, absolutely, he's a fine LB1 and it's somebody to rely on. So I like Bobby Wagner a lot. I'm cool with him in Washington, and I'm looking forward to see what he does there. And Sean made another good point to say that it is consistent. In Washington, we have seen top linebackers. Cody Barton had the season he had, so I can't wait to see what Bobby Wagner does there as far as tackles.
So, Steve, we talked about Frankie Louvu on Monday night, and there was a lot of general excitement about him signing with Washington, and we thought he might be the man in the middle. But we also talked about the fact that they were going to potentially move him around like they did with Micah Parsons. This signing of Wagner, it feels like even more so that they'll move Louvu around like they did with Parsons. Still feeling that same way, or maybe a different take?
Actually, I think the signing of Jeremy Chin, I think now confirms that Louvu is going to be moved around. Chin is more of in the box safety. And if you watch anything that Dan Quinn does, he likes his bigger safeties and that nickel back linebacker spot, which will put Wagner and I think Chin at the linebacker and Louvu on the edge, which I think is where he's going to be his biggest benefit. So the fact is that if they can put Louvu as a linebacker / defensive line, designation and whether it be Yahoo or Sleeper, I mean, Louvu is going to be a nice little play this upcoming season where you can put him at the defensive line, set him, forget him, and he's going to get you plenty of points. You think about like TJ Watt and Micah Parsons where they have that dual designation. So for me, I think the signing of Jeremy Chin, I think confirmed it, at least in my head, of this, what they think is going to do is Louvu's going to get moved around a lot. He's not going to just play at the linebacker position just to get his skill set used properly. I think Chin is going to be the winner out of this one, where he's going to play a little bit more at linebacker.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. And so let's go over to the Carolina Panthers linebackers, and let's talk a little bit about Josey Jewell. And Sean, I'm heading your direction on this one. So he was the number 2 linebacker in Denver, played about 70% of the snaps roughly. Looks like he's going to be the number 1 inside linebacker in Carolina. There's a chance that Carolina could still be losing a lot of games and could still be in the hunt for the number 1 pick in 2025 as well. Are you banking on Josey Jewell as a number 1 linebacker for this coming year? Sean?
Oof. So, yeah, there
Top
are
12.
plenty of tackle opportunities there. At 12, I'm nervous because of his injury history. And it seems like he's always injured. He got banged up last year and then kind of slowed up, kind of lost his spot because he was going into the season. He was the number 1 guy. Got hurt, then Singleton took over and never gave it back. Years prior, he's had injuries. So for as long as he's on the field, he can produce at a top 12 pace. I do think that is very possible. But I would definitely have a backup option ready to go at a moment's notice because, like I say, his health is what scares me. But if he's healthy, yes, he could very well be top 10.
Okay. All right, Johnny, I promise you we'd come back to Patrick Queen. Top 24 with the Steelers? And totally unbiased, of course. Or is he a top 12? Or... man, you know what? Before Roquan got there, he wasn't as productive as they were hoping. And now that he's away from Roquan, maybe he's not so productive as the number 1 guy. What are you thinking, Johnny?
You know what? I'm tied on this one because I think it's a great real life signing when it comes to fantasy. I had mentioned before the Steelers going back. I think you have to go back all the way till maybe Devin Bush was a rookie, or other than that, Ryan Shazier when he was there. Did the Steelers have a solid linebacker, for fantasy purposes? it's kind of been a crapshoot since then. So on one hand, even when like Landon Roberts signed, I'm like, yeah, he's their opportunity, but just something about the Steelers linebackers. Now, I'd like to think with Patrick Queen, that's different. I think he's going to defy the odds. I think he's somebody, number one, there's not really competition for him. So like how you had mentioned Roquan, at one point it's going to be, more tackle opportunities, but at the same time, there's nobody really to complement each other with. I still think, you could hope that he's a top 12. I wouldn't guarantee that right now. I'd say that's a little bit of reaching. I do think that he's absolutely in the top 24. Not far out of the top 12. I'd say maybe 15 is where I pencil him in right now, is the top 15, when we're talking redraft linebacker in tackle heavy leagues, I think, and probably gets a boost when it comes to big play leagues. So Patrick Queen, I think, is a great signing. I think he's going to make big plays, and that's, if you're in big play formats, I think this is good for him. I don't think he's going to be rushing the quarterback too much. He's not going to get sacks. They have their line, they have a great unit as a whole. But I do think making plays in the middle of the field, making tackles, and maybe making some passes, some tackles in the back, I think that's good for him. And I don't know that it can get any better than it was in Baltimore. That's why I say proceed with caution. But I do think that absolutely he's going to be, LB bottom tier, LB1 to put it least.
Okay, thank you. All right, Steve, let's go to your beloved Cowboys. We touched on Kendricks briefly earlier. He had committed to the 49ers, and but the Cowboys convinced him that was the place to go. So he'll obviously be filling well, I shouldn't say obviously, but it appeared that he would fill the Van Der Esch role. Sounds like Van Der Esch with his neck, this could be the end of the line for him, and hope that he's okay health wise. But on the Kendricks side, redraft purposes, top 36, or based on his positioning with the Cowboys, maybe he's a top 20-ish. Thoughts?
Definitely top 20. Realistically, he's going to be the starter. He's comfortable, right? He's got Zimmer as his coach. He played for Zimmer before, so he's going to get, he's very familiar with how this defense is going to play out. Van Der Esch is expected to retire. Nothing's been official or anything, but just the neck injuries have been really, really hard to deal with. And at this point, there really aren't any other linebackers to really overtake that middle inside spot, right? They still got Bell, right? You who's more of an outside guy. Overshown, I'm really curious how he's going to play. He's light in the tush, so we'll see how Overshown is. Obviously, he didn't get to play last year due to the injury, so he's going to be the only one that I feel has some ability to possibly go in there. But I like Kendricks. I actually like him as a top 20. I think realistically, I'm going into this season, the Cowboys will be playing behind, and teams are going to run the ball, and at least try to run the ball because of what everyone saw with what Green Bay did, right? To stop Micah Parsons, you just run at him. So I think there's going to be plenty of opportunities for him to get plenty of tackles, especially if you're in a IDP scoring league that just favors tackles. Kendricks will definitely be that guy. What I thought was great about Van Der Esch was he did make some big plays in the passing aspect too. I don't know how that's going to play out with Kendricks and his up there in age, but I do like him as a top 20 for sure.
Okay. Well, so I have a follow-up for you. You didn't mention Damone Clark, another LSU linebacker, just like Patrick Queen as a side note, the obligatory LSU call-outs. So what does this say about Damone Clark from a dynasty perspective? Are they just saying he's not a Mike? Do you see him moving back to that Will spot and Bell being to the bench now? So tell our listeners out there, what do you think is going to happen to that second linebacker spot with the Cowboys? Steve?
So at this point, my expectation, unless they go after, which I'm hoping they go after Cedric Gray from North Carolina in the draft, my expectation is Kendricks in the middle, Clark on the Will, and then I think Overshown will get the Sam, and Bell would be kind of the rotational player at this point. I like Bell, don't get me wrong, but he's too light for that position. He's got to show a little bit more. But that's my expectations. If depending on how this draft goes, it's Kendricks, Clark, and then Overshown.
Okay, great. Thank you on that one. So let's talk about safeties. Sean, there's a lot of safety signings. We had CJ going back to the Eagles, Whitehead to the Bucks, Jenkins to the Seahawks. We talked about Chin to the Commanders, Poyer to the Dolphins, McKinney to Green Bay, Geno Stone to Cincy, which we're going to have a separate discussion on him for a second. Brandon Jones to Denver, Byard to Chicago. I can go on. Out of all those, if you're doing a redraft right now, which one or two safeties out of those free agent moves? And well, Johnny, I'm going to ask you the same question as well. So, of all these safety moves, which one or two do you think pop higher up the list for you that you're looking for from a redraft perspective this coming year?
Well, so I guess Xavier McKinney was still, probably the biggest one there, especially with Devondre Campbell leaving. That opens up some more tackles. Just how well he played last year. I think that's probably the most intriguing right away. Jordan Poyer to the Dolphins. I find that one very interesting. I've been a big Jordan Poyer fan over the years, but he's losing his step, I think. So that would be a little more.
He didn't have any interceptions this past year, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and I think he was in and out of the lineup quite a bit too. So age is catching up. But from a play caller, I think he'll be a good captain on the backside where Deshaun Elliott was last year. So that should open up, somebody like Javon Holland. So again, probably not the most exciting, but it is one to keep an eye on later in drafts. Rayshon Jenkins is one I'm really intrigued about because I don't know how the Seahawks are going to use him just yet. I believe Julian Love, is he still there?
Julian Love is still there. That is correct.
Okay. Yeah, Adams and Diggs are both gone, right?
Correct.
So
what's interesting about Jenkins is that if that Jamal Adams role where they had him playing almost a third linebacker spot and they kept those three safeties on the field, and of course Adams got hurt again. Oh, by the way, another LSU player, but this one got hurt. But I digress. But Jenkins, if they use him in that Jamal Adams spot, could be extremely valuable. If they keep him a little bit deeper, like a Diggs or a Love or whatever, maybe not quite so valuable. So Johnny, let's go over to you. Is there one or two of those safeties that just jumped out to you that says, yeah, if I'm building my top 10 safety list, from a rankings perspective, one of these guys is clearly in the top 10 now?
I'd say McKinney. He was projected to be there based on when Steve and I talked about McKinney on our Trends podcast, we were talking about him. We said, I can't believe New York would let this guy go, right? Would not re-sign him. And that's eventually what did happen. I do think last year he put all the pieces together. I think that's his ceiling. I don't think it gets any better for Xavier McKinney. Now that they lost Owens, I think that, he's the man there. I don't think that there's going to be much, competition, we'll say. I think Xavier McKinney had a well-rounded season. It wasn't just all tackles. He was getting behind the line too. And I think McKinney's a great player. He's young. I believe he's only 24 years old. So I think it was a great signing, a lot of money given to him. So he better step up. I think that's a guy who's absolutely in that top 12. Another guy that I think is not the sexiest get, but just productive over his career is Kevin Byard. Going to Chicago, I think that's a great signing for them to pair with Brisker. Let Brisker kind of rush the quarterback, make those big splash plays. Byard just sit back and collect tackles. And where I come from, the leagues I play is tackle heavy. So, and I'll say this as a caveat, it's in big play scoring, it is nice to get the sacks, get the tackles for loss. But at the defensive back position, how frequent does that happen? Even Winfield himself had 6, sacks, which is incredible production, but you can't bank on that. So no matter what your scoring is, I think that for the defensive back position, really what you should be focusing is on tackles. And Kevin Byard, you don't have to get 5 or 6 picks out of him anymore like he was in Tennessee. He doesn't have to be making big plays, ball hawking back there. All he has to do is clean up tackles. And I think there's going to be plenty of them for Kevin Byard and also Brisker. I think that move doesn't really, knock down Brisker a peg. So I'm excited to see what Kevin Byard can do in Chicago, and also Xavier McKinney, just based on the caliber of player he is. I think he's still, a top 12 defensive back.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point for our listeners, and for particularly those that might be new to IDP and people that focus on interceptions and so forth. if I remember the stat correctly, it's roughly 450 interceptions happened last year. So you start dividing that by 32 teams, by 17 games in a year, the odds of interceptions are pretty low. So people expecting Deron Bland to repeat, don't draft that for that. It's just not going to happen, just like Trayvon Diggs the year before. So just thought I'd throw that out there. So it's a great point to keep an eye on who's got the best tackling opportunities. So I wanted to go back to Geno Stone and the Bengals. Of course, we looked last year. They signed Nick Scott from the Rams. They draft battle. They had drafted Dax Hill. So you started with Scott and Hill. Scott gets benched for battle. And then all of a sudden, to our surprise, Geno Stone, who was very productive on the interception side, by the way, don't expect that to repeat necessarily, but the Bengals steal him from the interdivisional Ravens here. Steve, I'm going to ask you this one. What do you think the Bengals going to line up, and how do you think they're going to use this? And Mike Hilton's still with them in the slot as well. So how do you think this is going to play out in that defensive secondary for the Bengals?
It's interesting because I've never trusted
That's
really
a tough
any
one.
defensive back for the Bengals when it came to IDP. Those guys are just kind of, stayed away. I understand the signing of Geno Stone, right? He had an amazing season, and like you mentioned, turnovers are such a hard thing to do, and especially to be very consistent. There's only a few handful ever that was that good, like Ed Reed, right? Palomalu, like there were some amazing safeties like that. That's not very common. So the worry that I have with Geno Stone is he also wasn't a great tackler. That's not something he's known for. So I'm curious what they're signing. I mean, maybe just to take a player away from Baltimore, right? Like it's a rival. Maybe that's the reason why you went after this. I thought that was kind of a surprise for me. I thought he was a little overpaid because he just hasn't proven anything yet. What is he? 4 years into the league right now? And, finally took an opportunity last year to really kind of be the guy. Yeah. So I'm not sure. I will say this, as far as any advice when it comes to fantasy, I'm staying away from any Bengals defensive backs at this current point, unless you're in a deeper league or maybe you're in Dynasty, you got Geno on your team. There's nothing wrong with that. I would have sold him a long time ago after this season, after what he just, had. It's tough, man. I don't know what they're going to do with these guys, right? Like their defensive players have never really stood out besides Wilson. He's been their only defensive player that I felt comfortable having on my squad. Just because the rest of this team is they're just too inconsistent across the defensive line, even defensive back. So I'm kind of a wait and see aspect because I am curious how they're going to play these guys.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you, Steve. So Steve's definitely down on Geno Stone. There's a thumbs down there. Okay, so we're going to jump to the offense in the last 8 minutes or so. But before we do, just a couple of yeses or nos. We'll quickly go around on a couple of players. Kenneth Murray going to the Tennessee Titans, appears to be the man in the middle. Does this make him a top 24? Just yes or no, Sean?
A reluctant yes.
Steve?
Yeah.
Johnny?
Reluctant yes.
Okay. Nicholas Morrow going to Buffalo.
No.
Top 48 linebacker. Sean?
No.
Steve?
No.
Johnny?
No.
The head's already shaking no. Got it. All right, good deal. Just wanted to hit a couple more of those free agents. Okay, let's jump over to the offense. I said we come back to Sam Darnold. So I wanted to do that for our audience. Is Sam Darnold this year's Baker Mayfield reclamation project? And next off season, he'll be signing the 3-year, $100 million contract. Steve?
That's so tough because unless Vikings move up or, maybe if Vikings get like Bo Nix or something, I do think Sam starts this year. I do think those two receivers and TJ Hawkinson are just so good. Sam will actually look really good. And surprisingly, he's going to get a contract. I can see that, I just think it'd be funny if the Jets sign him again. But I think he's going to earn, he's going to earn himself a contract. He is not going to earn himself a Baker contract because I think Baker was better in general. I think Baker would have been successful even on another team. But I don't think he will. I think he will get signed. He's going to go beyond this year. I do think he plays this year. I do think he can be a low-end QB2 in a super flex this season if he does truly start.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. All right, Johnny, who's going to start more games for the New York Giants at quarterback? Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, or a drafted rookie? Who's going to start more games for the Giants this year?
I'll take the safe route. I'm just going to say, everything's going to stay the way it is. Daniel Jones, he's going to be given the opportunity whether they draft somebody or not, just because the money's invested. I think Daniel Jones, at the end of the day, I think he gets one more year, but McCarthy might, another rookie for that matter, might get a redshirt year. And I think they really have too much money tied up with Daniel Jones. And I mean, really, what can you expect if you put a rookie in? Is he going to be better? I understand, there's only so much you can take, but man, that would be brutal for a rookie quarterback to come in that situation. So I think they just play it safe one more year and see what they got with Jones.
Okay. And that has obviously implications to all their other skill players, and it's part of the reason I'm asking. And it's so great question. Sean, Cleveland Browns just signed famous Jameis. If you're in a very deep super flex and very, very deep, and you have no trust in Deshaun Watson, are you stashing Jameis Winston on your bench?
Oh, yeah. Definitely. We've seen what Joe Flacco could do on that team, right? And anybody else that came in. They used, 20 guys at quarterback last year? Yeah. That system's built to be friendly. So, and they've loaded up with some better receivers. Yeah, absolutely. Jameis Winston. If you have Deshaun Watson, you should be getting him just in case.
Free
Steve,
Jameis,
I saw you nodding
please.
your head. Yeah.
Yes, free Jameis. He should have gone to Minnesota. It would have been amazing.
Yes.
I hate that he went to Cleveland, but he'll probably start at least 6 games this season. Deshaun will somehow hurt himself.
Yeah, Deshaun does not look like the same quarterback that he was in Houston. And so for all the excitement
Pockets
for
are too
Cooper
heavy.
and Judy going over, there's a lot of places I could go with the pockets thing, but we'll skip that for now.
I was referring to money.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate that. Okay, so one more on the quarterback side. Joe Flacco signs with the Colts today. How many games is he starting, Steve? Since you gave me the 6 prediction on Winston, how many games is Flacco going to start? Because Richardson, as much as he showed as a rookie, plays with reckless abandon, chance of getting hurt. Did Richardson learn his lesson and Flacco's going to start about 6 games himself? Or, Richardson's going to play 16 or 17 this year?
I believe Flacco does not play. I believe in Richardson. I believe Richardson's going to play all 17 games, and he'll probably end up being comeback player of the year.
Yeah. Nice.
Interesting. Okay, great. Speaking of maybe sort of comeback players, Jerry Jeudy traded to the Browns. We were just talking about Watson and Winston and so forth. So if Watson does get hurt, Winston's not afraid to sling it. He'll sling it to both teams, but he'll sling it. So is Jeudy a top 48 wide receiver or a top 36 wide receiver? And do you have him now ahead of Amari Cooper as Cooper hits into the 30s? Johnny, so where do you have him on the list? Top 36, top 48? Let's answer that first, or even better or worse?
Top 48. I mean, there's red flags. I'm personally I wasn't a Jeudy fan ever, even when he was drafted. I'm still waiting for him to prove me wrong. Not a fan of Deshaun Watson there. Amari Cooper kind of, beat the odds, and he is fine in my eyes. But no, Jerry Judy's 48 right now, and not really much higher. He's going to have to prove it for me. And the second question is, do I think he could be better than Amari Cooper? I think, over the next 5-6 years, but this year, no, not a chance.
Okay. Steve, Amari Cooper, are we getting off the bandwagon real quick while we're on the Browns before he falls off the cliff too quickly, or you think he's got another couple years ahead of him?
I'm not jumping off of him at all right now. I think at this point, I'm going to let other people think he's done so I can steal him in my redraft because I still think as great of a route runner that Amari Cooper is, even if he slows down just a bit, his routes are so crisp and so good, he's still going to get open. Like, he's just that good when it comes to that. And so many people have doubted him. And he is every single year, no matter what garbage is thrown his way, he has been an 1,000-yard receiver and top 20.
Okay. Sean, Mac Hollins signs with the Bills. Everybody's saying he's their new Gabe Davis. Would you draft Mac Hollins at the place that Gabe Davis was being drafted last year? Because remember, last year he fell significantly in drafts because everybody was PO'd from the year before when they expected this massive breakout. So is Mac Hollins worth having as a wide receiver 5 or 6 on your bench, or it's like, no, they're going to draft somebody else? What do you think, Sean?
Yeah, at 5 or 6, I wouldn't mind taking a dart throw on him because he could blow up for a big game or two, just like Gabe Davis did. There's no consistency there behind Diggs, really. So it's a dart throw at best. That's all I got. I don't see him fully taking over just because of the draft being so deep at wide receiver. You're going to throw those young guys out there and see what you got, I think. But he is an insurance play probably here and there.
Okay. All right. So on Monday night, I ran through all the list of free agent tight end signings, and it was less than exciting to say the least. Okay. And we did give at least I did give hey, keep an eye on Kobe Parkinson. Okay. So here's the signings since Monday. Gesicki to the Bengals, Irv Smith to the Chiefs, Everett to the Bears, which has me concerned about Kmet, by the way. Troutman re-signs with the Broncos, Harrison Bryant to the Raiders, Pharaoh Brown to the Seahawks, and Austin Hooper to the Patriots. Wow. Do any of those scream, hey, this one might sneak in as a low-end 2 based on their signings? I'm not asking for a 1, just a low to mid. Let's go low to mid 2. Do any of those sneak into that? And they're like, nah, Ricky, these are all number 3s. Johnny?
I mean, no. I'm just gonna say no, straight up. Maybe 1 rises through the rankings and is a streamer for us, but at this point in time, I don't think they're warranting any kind of draft capital. Wait and see. Maybe an injury pops up, but other than that, no.
Okay, Sean, you agree?
I'm a fan of Gesicki. I think he could turn into something, especially if T. Higgins leaves. That would open up quite a bit of targets, and Gesicki's a pretty good sized fella who likes to catch touchdowns. Not good at dancing, but yeah, I could seeing it being a thing there. Maybe Jamar Chase can teach him some moves, but yeah, I could see him potentially climbing up and being a solid 2.
All right, great. All right, last question we're going to have for this evening, and I'm going to go to Steve. Josh Uche. Was he drunk when he passed on $15 million to somebody else to settle for 3 with a chance for 8 with the Patriots?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Sean, there's loyalty, and then there's, I don't know what to call that. What do you think, Sean?
Is that puppy love? Is that what that is? I have no idea. He hasn't really been a thing, and I don't see him continuing to be a thing. So I would take the money and not be a thing somewhere else. But whatever.
Okay. All right. Good deal. So with that, we will call it a wrap for our Free Agent Palooza show here on this Wednesday. And we thank everybody for joining. I thank my esteemed colleagues, Johnny Freaking Fantasy, Steve at Average Joe's FF, and Sean at Sean8386. So excellent job. Great insight for our listeners. Really appreciate it. If you missed part of the show, go back and watch it. You'll be able to get to it through our IDP Plus website or our YouTube channel or IDP Plus. I didn't mention it earlier, but IDP Plus does have a special going on with the code word mock draft. For $1, you can, for the first month, $1, you can get access to everything that we have, all our tools, all our rankings, all our articles. Right now, we do have our offensive articles as non-paywall, but all our defensive articles are paywall. So if you want to take a look at that, $1, it's definitely worth it. You know, that's not even a cup of coffee these days, folks. So I hope you enjoy it. With that, we'll also be continuing our mock draft Mondays. You heard about Johnny and Steve talking about their show as well, so be on the lookout for that. These two gentlemen do an excellent job with their ITP Trend show. And I'll quit rambling and call it a wrap. Take care, be good to one another, be safe, and we'll talk soon. Look forward to seeing you all in the future. Bye, everyone.